All right, guys, just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. The college football playoff initial rankings have just been revealed. We're going to sit here and go through all of them with some initial thoughts and reactions. A lot of this stuff is going to work itself out over the final month of the season, so nothing really to overreact from, at least my viewpoint. But some things that definitely caught my eye that could potentially matter post conference championship weekend in early December when they look to make these rankings official and lock in that playoff bracket. So we're going to sit here and look at this. Starting with 1 through 5, Ohio State, Indiana, the two Big Ten teams, the clear tops in the country. A lot of people want to make of Ohio State's resume, and I don't think there's a whole lot to make a fuss about. I mean, this team has beaten everybody quite well on their schedule. Week 1 against Texas, a close victory. On the road, a game against Washington, I thought could be incredibly tricky for them. They handled them 24-6. Nobody else has really come close to the Buckeyes. Their offense looks good. The defense has been great. And the Buckeyes are going to play Michigan and then in the Big Ten title game. So a lot of people trying to say Ohio State really hasn't played anybody, and I don't think that's really fair because I think a lot of people know that this team would do very well against anybody in the country. And last year they played an abundance of ranked teams that end the year. I mean, you're looking at like 5, 6 in a row. I think maybe even 7 if you include that Texas game at one point. So this team has played tough opponents over the last 12 months. So I think that it's okay for them to play some lesser tier opponents like a Wisconsin, like an Illinois that's a respectable football team. So I think for Ohio State getting a little bit too much disrespect from a lot of people in college football, they're the clear number 1 in the country. Indiana number 2. This is a team that's also played, potentially a weaker strength of schedule in many people's eyes. And I certainly can agree with that. But they went on the road and played Oregon and Eugene. They beat them by 10 points. They played Iowa the game earlier. That was a tough game for them. They won that one as well. And then they've not struggled against anybody on their schedule. They're first nationally with 31-point differential when it comes to victory of margin. So I think Indiana, this is a team that is clearly proven what they can do on both sides of the ball. They don't fumble with any weaker tier opponents. And then the one they played that's the toughest on their schedule, they beat them on the road pretty handily. So I think Indiana at 2 is very good. Texas A&M at 3 having a very good season. This is a team in the SEC that has a pretty impressive resume. They just went to Baton Rouge most recently and got Brian Kelly fired. They've got solid wins over Florida. At Notre Dame's obviously the top one on their schedule. A couple of close games every here and there. The one over Arkansas wasn't ideal. Lower scoring affair against Auburn at home. But for the most part, I think Texas A&M has really proved their worth as well as a balanced offense. It's one of the most dangerous units in the country. Some issues potentially with their defense with inconsistencies when it comes to limiting explosive runs, finding pass rush outside of Cassius Howell. They're going to play a ranked Missouri team this weekend, and for A&M, they also get Texas at the end of the year. So for Texas A&M, a lot is still in front of them to vindicate this ranking or to prove that maybe it was a little bit overblown at this moment in time. I think 3 is appropriate. Alabama, a team that's got a lot of ranked wins on their schedule, that lost to Florida State week 1. Obviously isn't great with how the Noles have looked since then, and that could potentially look to bite Alabama in the back at some point. They still have tough games to play themselves. They host LSU this weekend. They still got Auburn on the schedule, Oklahoma as well. So if Alabama has any type of slip-ups, that FSU loss week 1, I think could potentially come back into play. But right now, it's not something that's affecting their rankings, and I agree with that from the committee. Georgia at 5, a team that's also had a lot of hiccups. Every week they seem to be in a close game, and they have elite resilience, unlike I've ever seen from anybody, especially in college football this year. Just beat Florida by a couple points. We're getting beat up by Ole Miss at home for a majority of that game. They turned it up in the fourth quarter. At Tennessee, they were also down double figures in that one back early in September and pulled out a miraculous victory in overtime, survived the trap game in Auburn, and then they almost came back and beat Alabama despite getting off to a very slow start in that one. That's one of the biggest problems for the Bulldogs is their defense has just had so many slow starts, and potentially at some point it could bother them, but this offense is just very vicious when it comes to their resilience. They have nice balance. Gunnar Stockton's been playing some very good football in crucial moments, so Georgia at 5, no argument there from me, even though, again, they're kind of skating by, it seems. The Bulldogs, though, continue to prove their worth. They also have tough games on the horizon against Georgia Tech and Texas. Looking at 6 through 10, Ole Miss sitting at 8-1. They have a very good win at Oklahoma just a couple of weeks ago. They played great against Georgia. They scored like 5 straight drives to open up that game. Again, before they went a little cold in the fourth quarter. Very good football team. Trinidad Chambliss has come in at quarterback unexpectedly and been very impressive from them from a dual threat standpoint. In terms of, great wins, that's pretty much it. LSU right now, that win's kind of wearing off a little bit. Tulane, maybe they just lost, though, 45-10 victory they had back in September. So the strength of schedule, I think, is still very good for Ole Miss. And the way they played against Georgia, I think, proves that they're worthy of being one of the higher-ranked teams in the country, because that's a game they absolutely could have won, and putting up that many points on a Georgia defense in Athens is incredibly difficult. And then that's a great defense there at Oklahoma that they were able to put up 430 yards of offense on. So I like Ole Miss at 6. I think this ranking is probably going to hold for them. Their schedule is not all that difficult as the year goes on. They do have Mississippi State at the end of the year, and if they lose that game, I think that could certainly cause them to drop outside of the top 12. So these are kind of the things I want you to note in terms of future rankings, because there's some things that could definitely hamper these teams. I alluded to Alabama. If they have another slip up somewhere, they could potentially be on the outside looking in, even though I still think that it's going to be pretty improbable for the Crimson Tide not to make it to Atlanta. But some of these losses, some of the things on the schedule, these are what I'm taking notes of that could certainly affect these rankings in a drastic way. BYU sitting at number 7. Them and Texas Tech, they're going to play this weekend, and that's going to sort that self out. But Texas Tech, their win was much more impressive over Utah. Went to Salt Lake City, pulled out a beatdown in that fourth quarter that really allowed them to pull away 34-10. BYU, they needed a slew of fourth down stops to survive at home against Utah. 24-21 victory there. They also had a come-from-behind victory against Arizona and Colorado. So not exactly the greatest of looks from this team. But I think them being undefeated is getting respect from the committee, and I can totally understand that, and that's why they're going to be ranked higher than Texas Tech. I think the Red Raiders win that game on Saturday. We'll see what happens at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC, though. So that's going to work its way out, I think, in terms of the Big 12 trying to get 2 teams into the playoffs. We'll talk about that, but BYU, I think if they are going to indeed lose this game, they need to keep it close. If Texas Tech loses, that's going to be very shocking and potentially knock them out completely. 10-point favorites, though, in that one. So Red Raiders should win. Oregon at 9. This is a team that just doesn't have that great of a resume. Not an awful schedule, but that was a bit of a letdown against Indiana. I mean, they looked good in the first half, and then the second they really slowed down against the Hoosiers, and they pulled away to a massive victory there. At the time, it seemed like the Penn State game. They won 30-24 in overtime was a big win. Clearly, as times went on, it has not. Northwestern's probably their best win overall, 5-3 team right now. They beat them by 20 points on the road back in early September. This is a team that still has a lot in front of them as well. Iowa and USC and Washington still on the docket. So the opportunities are going to be there for them to prove that they deserve to be in the rankings, despite at the moment having a bit of a weaker tier schedule. It's all in front of them, so I'm not going to freak out if Oregon. They can continuously push their strength of record higher, and I think they might ultimately do that. I did pick them to lose to Iowa this Saturday, though. Again, another one of those teams where things are going to sort themselves out. Notre Dame at 10, very interesting here. Their 2 losses to Miami and Texas A&M by just a combined couple of points. This is an Irish team I think a lot of people know are very good. They were able to beat USC a couple weeks ago by 10. NC State, I think, is a respectable win, 36-7 there. Arkansas on the road. The Hogs have played some teams in conference pretty close, and they beat the brakes off of them 56-13. And those 2 losses back early on in the season are not bad losses by any means for Notre Dame. I think this is clearly a team that is one of the top 10 in the country, so I understand that ranking wholeheartedly. They're not going to have many opportunities left on their schedule to boost their resume at all. So if by chance they're contending for a final spot and they play a couple of knockout, drag-out type games at the end of the year, they could definitely see themselves plummeting in the rankings. But I think Notre Dame for right now is fairly ranked. You move to 11 through 16. This is also quite interesting from my point of view, because Texas and Oklahoma getting maybe potentially a little bit more respect than they should. The Longhorns have not looked that great, and their season almost came to an end just a couple weeks ago against Mississippi State. They were down like 17 points in that game in the fourth quarter, rallied for a victory in overtime. Week before that, Kentucky, they beat them in overtime as well. So not the greatest body of work from Texas, and I think this is a team that's definitely not playing their best football yet, and I expected some early season struggles. I thought they'd be figured out by now. We're in November. But on the offensive side of the ball, they're coming off a great victory against Vanderbilt. That game was not as close as the 34-31 final indicates. But this is a team that still has a very impressive defense. They have all the talent to compete on offense. They also have their toughest games ahead of them with Georgia and Texas A&M. Being at 11, that was very interesting. I think they're giving them a lot of respect for that Week 1 game against Columbus. I don't feel like in Week 1 the games hold as much weight. But for them, that's great for their resume to lose that one by only 7 at Florida. That was the game I picked the Gators to win back on the 4th of October. So no shocker there. I picked them to beat Oklahoma and bounce back after that game against the Gators, and they did that well, 23-6. Their defense really came alive against a bit of a hobbled John Mateer and really put him in a world of pain. But I thought that they would look pretty good against Vanderbilt after a couple of sluggish road games in the SEC. Figured the offense would come out and look good. The defense would control the line of scrimmage, and they did that for the most part. Vanderbilt, in the back half of that game, really made it closer than it should have been. That was a very impressive performance from Texas because doing that to Vanderbilt has been incredibly tough for really any opponent over the last 2 years. Vanderbilt ended up with over 400 yards of passing. They were playing or 400 yards total. That is, they were playing from behind. And again, the game really was not close. What they did to Vanderbilt and kind of solving that offensive scheme was impressive. Oklahoma at 11, that's interesting as well because they had a disappointing loss to Ole Miss at home. The game against Texas, they lost by double figures. Didn't really even come close in that one, especially in the second half where the Horns ran away with it. The win over Michigan holds a lot of weight. Early season game, non-conference they got in Norman. Obviously, he's going to do a lot of things for them. And then they just beat Tennessee on the road. I picked them to win that game. They were able to kind of start slow in that one on defense, and they really rallied. The defensive line was just murdering the Volunteers' offensive front. So in terms of body of work, should this team be number 12? I'm really not sure they should be the first team out. I think that's very interesting to me. They're going to play Alabama. So again, another team where I'm not going to overreact to because they're going to have an opportunity to prove it. And I think this defense is really good, even though they've had some struggles the last couple weeks against some of these tougher offenses. And their own offense has not been very good. I don't think they can run the football. They don't have all that many playmakers at pass catcher. The offensive line's very sluggish. In Mateer, it's really hard for him to carry the entire load. So it's going to be hard for Oklahoma to ultimately get in the CFP. But I think them being at 12 is very interesting. And I think the committee is respecting the SEC tremendously. Certainly wondered how they would do that when this is a conference that plays ranked games every single week. And the SEC got a lot of respect in these initial rankings. And those are the things I'm noting. Much like Utah at 13, a lot higher than I thought they would be, especially with that double-figure loss at home to Texas Tech. BYU, a game they potentially should have won. They went like 1 for 5 on fourth down in that one. Looked very good on offense, though. They had 470 yards of offense in that game. They just blew out Cincinnati 45-14. Another really good football team with almost 500 yards of offense. I think this is a legitimately good football team, right? The 2 losses coming to those top 10 teams, much like Notre Dame. Yeah, you have 2 losses, but they're respectable ones against pretty good football teams. So that's where the committee is giving them a lot of respect. And I think Utah at 13 is really the biggest topic here because the Big 12 is going to look to slot 2 teams into the college football playoff. And I think the BYU Texas Tech thing is going to solve itself out. If Texas Tech wins like I think they will, they should win out, shouldn't lose another game the rest of the season. And that's going to allow Utah to slot in to the playoff potentially because I also don't think this is a team that's going to lose again. Devon Dampier and his rushing attack led with a physical offensive line and a nice, well-coached defense. Or, why this team is so highly valued. They still play at Baylor, at Kansas. They host Kansas State. I think they should win all those games. The game against the Wildcats could maybe potentially be tricky. But when you look at these standings in the Big 12, Utah they're a long shot to make the conference championship game. So I'm very interested by them at 13 because they're likely not going to be playing for any titles in early December, and that's going to allow them to slot in regardless of the results, really. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and obviously, again, we'll see where they're ranked in a couple of weeks, but Utah's going to be there, and I'm almost certain they're going to be that second team that slots in with Texas Tech into the college football playoff, so that's something that needs to be noted, especially with these SEC teams. A lot of this stuff, is going to work itself out, and that's going to lead to a couple of spots opening up for them, so Utah's a team I'm eyeing to potentially slot in. Virginia avoided the trap game at Cal this past weekend after a couple of close games for their offense. I picked them to beat Florida State many weeks back, and I think that's what's allowing them to really have this high ranking. Of course, the win over Louisville as well. Their defense scored 14 points in that one. Their offense was not very good in that contest. They still got the job done on the road. He had 237 yards of offense. Not very good. They beat Washington State by 2, North Carolina on the road by an inch in overtime. So the last couple weeks have just not been very good for Virginia. And then they bounced back for 450, and their defense played quite well against Cal to kind of cool the tension with Virginia. Tony Elliott in this program, coming into the season, we felt like this would be a chance for them to do some damage. Didn't think they'd be the highest-ranked ACC team at this moment of early November, but Virginia's hanging right in there. Will they be able to compete in the playoff? I'm not sure. I think they have a very good quarterback, some nice guys on offense. I just don't know if the defense is deep enough, and I don't know if they're going to be able to be consistent enough because the offense at times is really struggling against weaker opponents. So for Virginia right now, awesome to see them as the top dog right now in the ACC. Looking at right behind them, you have Louisville, a potential rematch on the horizon in the ACC title game. I think this is a conference that's looking right now at only getting one team in the playoff. We'll talk about Miami, a team that obviously can't get their act together ever. So I think the ACC right now is probably going to be the odd dog out. They're only going to be looking to get that conference champion in 16 through 20. Vanderbilt, this is a team that has a lot of tough games remaining. If they can win them, they'll be in. If they don't, they're clearly not going to be in. So I think for Vanderbilt, this is a team that has incredibly tough offensive schematics. Clark Lee is a nice defensive coach as well. Very tough team to beat. I think if you beat them, that's a very impressive win on your resume, even if they end the season with 4 losses potentially. Very impressive win on your resume if you have them. Georgia Tech, you know they were going to slip up at some point. Their defense got bludgeoned against NC State, though. Very disappointing to see. Georgia Tech still right there in the thick of things. They have a game against Georgia coming up at the end of the year that's going to be potentially big for both teams that want to slot into the playoffs. At Boston College, they host Pittsburgh still, so still a lot for Georgia Tech. This is a team that can absolutely get their way back into the playoff, especially if they can make their way into the ACC title game and win it. So there's still a lot on the line for Georgia Tech at 17. You can absolutely see them surging up the rankings as the weeks go on. I just alluded to Miami 6-2, a team that just I don't know. They just lost to SMU. They lost to Louisville. They did beat Notre Dame though. And that's going to carry a lot of weight for them all the way back in week 1. Potentially could be a team that gets in if a lot of chaos unfolds. I just don't see it right now for Miami, unfortunately. I don't know how impressive they're even going to look the rest of the year. The opponents are pretty easy. NC State at Pitt, not the easiest of opponents, but I mean, they've just really struggled against everybody over the last couple of weeks, it seems. So we'll see what Miami does. This is a team I think could definitely be a sleeper, but they need a lot of chaos to unfold, especially in its own conference, and that could give them some life. But the Hurricanes right now, not a team I'm eyeing to make the college football playoff. USC, a team that's got a lot in front of them. They're going to be playing 20th ranked Iowa next week, and then they're going to be playing Oregon after that. If they can win those 2 games, they're going to be sitting as a 2-loss Big Ten non-conference champion appearance. And I think they'll be in the playoff if they can take care of that. So we'll see what happens with USC. This is a team that on the road has been very sluggish, though. They still have to go to Eugene and beat the Ducks. And they're just a shell of themselves when they go on the road. But when they're in LA, they make things happen. They will be hosting the Hawkeyes. So it's a chance for USC to make some things happen. The defense has been improved, but it's still vastly inconsistent. But in my estimation, if USC can get over Iowa and Oregon, they'll be sitting in a pretty good position to make the CFB as a non-conference champion, representee. So looking at 21-25, Michigan play Ohio State. I think if they beat Ohio State again, which is certainly on the table, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that Michigan won't do it again. Then I think you're going to see them catapult up the rankings. Be interesting to see though from 21. By the time the game happens, they'll probably be still outside the top 15. You'll have to see how that unfolds. It's obviously a hypothetical, but Michigan's still a team at 21 that is absolutely in the thick of things. The losses are not all that bad for them against Oklahoma and then against USC. Those games on the road were tough for them. They have a nice victory over Washington. I think for Michigan, though, this is a team that can absolutely slot their way back in to the thick of things. Missouri, they play Texas A&M on Saturday at home. I think they have a good shot of winning that game. I don't think they do ultimately, but it's a game that's going to be a bit tougher for the Aggies, and I think most people will admit. Washington at 23. I'm a big fan of this football team and DeMond Williams. They have a very good offense. They host Oregon at the end of the year, so if the Ducks take care of their business and they can beat them, maybe they can also shoot their way up the rankings. Pittsburgh, one of the top dogs in the ACC right now, so they have a great shot of getting it done. And then Tennessee doesn't really have any impressive wins, but their losses are pretty impressive, so I guess that's why they're sitting at 25. So that's the top 25 rankings. Looking at this college football playoff bracket and my thoughts on it, again, this is all going to really sort itself out. It's interesting to look at, but in reality, it probably doesn't matter all that much. But it does include the group of 5 representee in Memphis. There is no group of 5 teams ranked in these top 25s. I think Memphis and USF are still going to contend for that spot from the AAC. I think it's clear cut and dry. That's going to be one of those 2 guys. And they're going to be likely traveling to, Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M. Probably the loser of the SEC championship game is likely what their first round matchup will be. USF, I think they can certainly contend potentially, depending on the matchup. I think Memphis probably not as much. That's going to sort itself out again. Oregon and Texas Tech. How interesting would that be? In Lubbock, a home game for the Red Raiders against the Ducks. Ole Miss and Virginia, maybe a game that people probably won't care as much about. And then BYU potentially hosting Notre Dame is on the docket for right now. And again, they've switched up the seeding. It's not going to be the highest ranked conference champions. It's going to be the highest 4 ranked teams, period. Which is obviously great for the sport, and that's how it should be. Right now, is this bracket exciting for the first-round games? No, not exactly. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, but I definitely think that these are going to improve as time goes on. There's going to be a lot more clarity over this final month. And this will be This will evolve tremendously. I don't think any of the matchups you see right now are going to be the final matchups, so not a big worry from me, but that's how things are currently slated with the rankings. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.